Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Hardani Camacho, and I will be the moderator for our presentation. I am a member of Fluor's Office of Technology, which focuses on using science and innovative engineering technology to build a better world. Our engineers, designers, and experts, our people, are at the core of our success. Today's webinar is titled Manganese and Graphite, the Forgotten Critical Minerals. Critical minerals are essential components in many of today's clean energy technologies, from wind turbines to electric vehicles. Demand for these minerals has been significant as the drive to meet reductions in greenhouse gas emissions accelerates towards 2030 and 2050 targets. Today, China has a dominant position in the value chain for many of the critical minerals, which has resulted in many Western countries choosing to develop specific critical mineral strategies to ensure access to these valued commodities. Access to lithium, nickel, cobalt, vanadium, and rare earth elements has been a key focus for many countries. However, two specific critical minerals, manganese and graphite, are often overlooked. During this webinar, Fluor Fellow Andrew Curtis, a member of Fluor's Critical Minerals team, will demystify the role that manganese and graphite play in the battery chemicals and electric vehicle markets. To set the stage for today's webinar, please join me in welcoming Etienne Brettel. Etienne, thanks for joining us, and over to you for the HSC topic.
Thank you, Hardani. Good day, everyone. It is my honor today to share with you a HSC topic related to lithium-ion battery safety as an introduction to the main theme that Andrew will present today during the webinar. Lithium-ion batteries are commonly found in modern society in a large range of products and equipment. Typical examples can be seen on the illustration, and they range from handheld tools, wireless devices such as laptops, headsets, smartwatches, light electric vehicles, including electric scooters and e-bikes, passenger vehicles, which ranges from hybrids to full electric vehicles, industrial equipment as well, such as forklifts, earth-moving equipment, and then up to heavy vehicles such as trucks, buses, and even large mining equipment that recently operates on battery power. This is also extended to power supply systems, generators, and battery systems as backups to large operating facilities. These products are used, stored, and charged in common facilities such as workplace, at home, as well as in public areas, and does present a risk to the environment and to people. I will discuss various HSE-related challenges over the next few slides. One of the most prominent safety hazards related to lithium-ion batteries is fire. These batteries can catch fire when thermal runaways occur and will typically give off large quantities of smoke and fumes. So thermal runaways are often caused by damage to batteries, such as equipment that falls or equipment that gets bumped by other impacts. Overcharging and even under or over discharging of batteries, which is an interesting topic, as well as overheating of batteries, mostly due to insufficient ventilation. So larger battery packs or systems can present significant hazards when they overheat and catch fire. It should be noted that traditional suppression systems may not be sufficient to control large fires of these battery systems. I will briefly discuss typical components of lithium-ion battery types in the next slide. So all batteries consist of three main components, and that would be the anodes, a separator or electrolyte, as well as a cathode. You will note on the right-hand side of the slide that I've included some common types of lithium-ion batteries. The names of the batteries will typically describe the cathode. So the first, for example, would be lithium cobalt oxide, or also referred to as LCO, is a description of the cathode for that type of battery. And then others include lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide, or NCM, lithium nickel cobalt aluminum oxide, NCA. One of the more common ones, lithium iron phosphate, LFP, as well as lithium manganese oxide, LMO. The anode will typically be graphite in most cases. So it's clear from the terminologies and the variety of batteries, as well as the chemical compositions, that there are constant attempts to optimize battery or energy storage facilities, and that new variations are produced into the market on a frequent basis. The next slide will suggest a number of controls that can be considered to better manage the risks associated with these batteries. There are a number of good practices that can be applied to lithium-ion batteries to better manage or avoid thermal runaways and associated fires. Smart chargers can be installed to monitor lithium-ion battery status and automatically disconnect power when faults are detected. Regular inspections should be done to monitor battery temperature and physical condition. And you can see on the two inserts a laptop where the laptop became deformed due to a battery that expanded. And the second slide actually illustrates the battery itself, and it's very clear how, to what extent the battery can expand when it's faulty. So regular inspections, we spoke about that. Always use batteries that are recommended by equipment manufacturers and avoid no-name brands, as well as cheap replacement options. It's better to follow the manufacturer's specifications at all times. Provide safe storage facilities away from flammable materials for batteries. Provide dedicated charging areas in safe locations. Ensure equipment is well ventilated, which is quite important, and installed in a suitable fire detection system and suppression systems, especially when it's larger systems. Provide adequate access to remotely disconnect or isolate battery chargers in the event of fire. Placement of charging equipment away from emergency exits and evacuation routes. So where appropriate, also one can consider different types of batteries, and Andrew will, during his presentation, touch on certain batteries that are regarded as safer than other options. So it's good to have that awareness as well. Then lastly, to also develop emergency response plans for the events of lithium-ion battery fires, and just to be prepared in the event of that occurring. On the last slide, I will share some considerations related to the disposal of lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion batteries will require special consideration when reaching the end of life. The batteries contain heavy metals and hazardous chemicals and are often toxic and unfriendly to the environment. It is therefore important to take care when disposing of lithium-ion batteries for environmental and safety reasons. The following guidelines are good practices that should be followed when disposing of batteries. So it's important to protect yourself from burns and during the disposal and handling of discarded batteries. Never touch swollen or ruptured devices or batteries with bare hands, as the heat and chemicals can cause severe burns. Always use gloves before touching or moving leaking batteries, and you can see an example of gloves in the insert. Many battery-related fires start in household bins, garbage trucks, and waste facilities. So avoid disposing swollen and warm batteries in this manner. It's advisable to rather contact a specialist to dispose of them. Where safe to do so, place leaking or damaged batteries in a clear plastic container and dispose of them at authorized disposal facilities. It is the environmentally responsible thing to do, and I think that is also what we aim to do as we progress through the ages, to look after the planet and to also recycle as much as we can and reuse batteries for the future. So I hope this topic was informative, and I will now hand over to Andrew to share some interesting facts about critical minerals associated with lithium-ion batteries. So thank you, and over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Etienne, for your safety topic. It's certainly a great segue into my presentation today. I guess before I start, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all online, depending on where you're dialing in from. I'm located in Australia, and it's midnight here, so I'm certainly hoping to remain lucid and coherent, so bear with me. Today I'll be discussing critical minerals, and specifically two, manganese and graphite, and their involvement really, I guess, in the EV battery chemistry. To start, I'll provide a definition of critical minerals and then explore some of the demand and supply drivers. I'll then focus on a couple of specific aspects of battery chemistry and really just to highlight manganese and graphite. And then I'll conclude with a brief discussion on some of the emerging technologies, but also developments, I guess, in geopolitics that are currently occurring in the critical minerals space, and then obviously open up for questions. So hoping the presentation is of interest, so let's get started. So the image on the right-hand side summarizes critical minerals, which are common for a number of countries. And obviously I'm showing here the USA, the United States of America, the European Union, Japan, India, and Australia. Now, the list itself is not comprehensive in terms, it doesn't cover every single critical mineral. These are the ones that are simply just common for each of those countries. If we look at the top there, you can see Be, so beryllium, bismuth. We see carbon or graphite, cobalt. You've got gallium, germanium, lithium, manganese, and vanadium. Now, obviously today I can't focus on all of those, but I'm looking to call out specifically the graphite and manganese. So I guess down the bottom right-hand corner you can see is rare earths. It's probably a topic in itself, and I'm really not going to go too much into the detail of rare earths, but certainly they also play a valuable role and are considered critical minerals typically by most countries. Now, critical minerals really, why? I guess I'm saying they're necessary for battery manufacture, and they certainly feature consistently on this common list. And what's interesting to note is that each country has their own list, and this can vary over time. As I mentioned, I'll focus specifically today on manganese and graphite. So really, to understand critical minerals, it's important to examine really, I guess, firstly, where they occur and how they are processed. So this is a busy slide, so probably just bear with me, I guess. To start left-hand side, I'm showing lithium or Li. And lithium for mining, you can see that, I guess, the extraction and processing of lithium is really crucial to the production of lithium-ion batteries. And the graphic shows that for mining of lithium, there really are three dominant countries, and that's really China, Chile, and Australia. Of interest is that the Chilean lithium typically is sourced from what we refer to as salars, which are high-altitude lakes. In Australia, typically lithium is sourced from hard rock or spodumene. It's probably also interesting to note that in some instances, lithium can be hosted in sedimentary clay deposits as well. If we move from mining lithium into material processing for lithium, we can see there as well that China has over 60% of the market share. And then if we move across to the right-hand side into the cell components for the batteries and then into the battery cells themselves, you can see that China in red has shown really is a very dominant player. If we then move, I guess, to nickel, or Ni as shown on the graphic, really over the past 10 years, the nickel market has changed, and Indonesia has really established itself as a very dominant supplier to the material processing sector. And I guess interesting to note also, they do have themselves a significant downstream refining capacity. If we look at cobalt really, I guess the dominant player here, really a bit hard to see perhaps, is in yellow, which is the DRC, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. One of the core issues here, though, is ethical sourcing. And I guess a lot of countries are looking to see how they can reduce their dependence on cobalt from DRC because of these industry challenges. And certainly from a refining perspective, a lot of that refining capacity lives in China, over 80%. If we then move to graphite, or GR as it's shown on this graphic, really this is very much a China supply chain. You can see that for mining, China has over 80% of mining based on this graph, and processing, it's close to 100%. I think it's about 98% based on this graphic in 2023. So in summary, really China has a dominant position in the value chain for many of the critical minerals. Many Western countries are now developing specific critical mineral strategies to ensure access to these valued commodities. And these strategies can include building their own sovereign capabilities, as in within their own countries in critical minerals processing. And obviously, if they can't do that, then looking to perhaps establish diverse, sustainable, resilient supply chains through international partnerships with trusted advisors or trusted partners, should I say. And typically, of course, not Chinese related. They're looking to move away from that. So let's look at, I guess, now what is driving the demand for critical minerals. And it makes for an interesting graph. So over the past 15 years, I guess I'm focusing specifically my presentation here really around electric vehicles. Now, of course, it really relates to clean energy technologies, but I'm focusing mostly on electric vehicles. And the graph on the left-hand side really starts to show the demand, if you will, for electric vehicles. Now, as you can see in the sort of 2010, 2011, 2012, very low uptake. But as interest and developments occurred and pricing and I guess became kind of fashionable because people saw it as something a little bit different, interest picked up. And now, of course, people are really seeing the benefits. And you can see that the graph really is heading up year on year with very strong growth in the 20s and 30% growth year on year. I've seen stats which would indicate that by 2030, 60% of vehicles in the world will be electric. So I guess that's something we'll keep an eye out for. In terms of, I guess, the electric vehicles themselves, per this graph, again, China is shown in red. And you can see that China was probably the leader in the uptake for electric vehicles. But what's interesting to note now is that Europe and the rest of the world are seeing increased demand, which is obviously continuing to push that aspect. I guess in terms of really what's taking place, if we look at on the right-hand side, obviously with the demand, we need to then supply raw materials or critical minerals to support that demand. And supply of critical minerals obviously also needs to increase dramatically. And I guess the graph on the right is a bit difficult to comprehend just looking at it, so let me just talk you through it. So what I'm trying to show here is the demand of today, 2022, this is when the graph was produced, compared to the demand of 2050. So what we're looking at here is, if you look at graphite, let's go with lithium perhaps, it's estimated that in 2050, the ratio, as in the amount of additional capacity, it's about 40 times what is available now. So clearly for lithium moving forward, the demand requirement means that you have to increase supply substantially. Now, of course, there are impacts at the moment. We're seeing lithium mines being put on pause and being ramped down. There's other reasons for that, which I'll cover in my presentation a bit later on. Similarly, the supply of graphite, which is the second bar on the right-hand side, is also suggesting an increase substantially of about 25 times to meet predicted demand. There are, of course, other market factors which aid to the complexity, but gives you a bit of a snapshot. One interesting thing, I guess, and Etienne really touched on it in his safety moment, was the recent shift, I guess, to not just EVs, but also to hybrid vehicles. And I cover that in my next slide. So let me explain this slide. As per the previous graphic, the demand for electric vehicles has continued year on year over the past 15 years. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see a bit of a legend there talking about BEVs and also PHEVs. And the battery electric vehicles is clear. That's what I've just been talking about. But the PHEVs relates to essentially a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Now, what's interesting is that there's been a shift in the last couple of years towards hybrid. And what I mean by hybrid is essentially a dual fuel. So it's a dual power source that may be fuel and electric. And certainly there are several schools of thought as to why this is occurring. One is that they're obviously cheaper than the fully electric vehicles. The gap is decreasing, but there is still a cost delta. The leap from standard vehicles to hybrid for some people is a lot smaller than going directly to full EV, electric vehicle. Some consumers have commented that they're more willing to embrace fully electric vehicles after they've owned a hybrid. They get to see the benefits. And in some cases, and I think certainly true in some of the larger countries, and certainly we've seen this in Australia, is the availability of charging network infrastructure. In some cases, the maturity of it isn't there yet. So obviously, reliant wholly and solely on charging infrastructure means you're limited where you can go with your car. So a hybrid gets around that issue. I guess as an interesting side note, the platinum market and the commodity price related to platinum has actually seen an uptick in demand. And really, I put this down to largely the fact that you still need to have catalytic converters in hybrid vehicles to control emissions from fuel engines. So that's interesting and a bit of a spin-off, I guess, from going down the hybrid path. So maybe let's now, I guess, look at the critical minerals supply chain. The graphic, as shown, really looks to try and, in very simple terms, explain the various steps in the process. And it really starts from the initial mining and material processing through to intermediate products, then into the downstream production, including the batteries, obviously, into the EV vehicles. And I also refer in here to recycling. I mean, ultimately, it's expected that recycling will contribute a portion of the battery chemicals needed for EVs. And that's really based on a sort of a circular economy. And obviously, Etienne talked about that when disposing of damaged or end-of-life batteries. I won't focus too much in the presentation on recycling, as really the market is still relatively immature. But what is fair to say is, as the uptake in electric vehicles continues, the volume of critical minerals obviously will necessitate demand for recycling. Now, what's probably important to note is that recycling, by incorporating that into this circular economy, it will enable, I guess, ultimately the footprint to reduce. And why is that? Because there's less energy required for recycling, and it has lower carbon emissions compared to the traditional greenfields refining process. And probably the most important point is keeping the recycling local actually assists in reducing transport costs, which is obviously ESG carbon footprint. And probably the other thing that I guess I've recently been looking at is one of the former co-founder, J.B. Straubel from Tesla. He co-founded Tesla with Elon Musk. In 2019, he created a very large mega battery recycling facility known as Redwood Materials. So it's pretty clear that the industry are already seeing the need to adopt recycling. But I'm really looking to focus more on the sort of upstream space. So let's stay there. Needless to say, the processing of end-of-life batteries is necessary to recover critical minerals as we move forward. So moving to the next slide, please, Sabina. So as you saw in Etienne's safety topic, I guess reproduced the image. And really what we're talking about is electric vehicles do require advanced battery technologies. This graphic shows the common components, and obviously Etienne alluded to those, which are the anode on the left-hand side, the cathode on the right-hand side, and in the middle, essentially separator/electrolyte. Now, when the battery is discharging, the ions from the anode basically flow to the cathode, through the electrolyte/separator. When the battery is being charged, obviously it's being applied to the anode. Yeah, typically the anode, as shown on the graphic here, is carbon, although we're starting to see some changes in that, which I'll touch on in subsequent slides. But on the right-hand side, as Etienne referred, most of the battery development that's taking place currently is in the cathode active material, which is the lithium, the nickel, the cobalt, and the manganese, as shown on the right-hand side. Now, the blend of these chemistries really depends on how much consumers are prepared to pay and essentially how far the battery will enable them to run without having to recharge. I guess really in terms of how we move forward, a few examples of battery chemistry are presented on the next slide, and really this is just an opportunity to try and demystify what goes into them and why it's important. I've actually highlighted 3 specific battery types here. Each of them have their own sort of benefits and challenges, but I think a general statement is lithium-ion batteries are widely used, and they're widely used because they generally have high energy density, relatively long lifespan, and generally lightweight, which is obviously important to be as efficient as possible. Now, the first one I'm showing there is the LFP, and as Etienne said, it's lithium iron phosphate. It's typically very safe, long cycle life and thermal stability is okay. LFP batteries are widely used in buses and lower cost electric vehicles. Then moving to the next one, which is often called either NMC or NCM, as shown on the graphic, which is the lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide batteries. They generally have the highest energy density. And then looking at use often in the long-range electric vehicles, so they typically are able to go a lot longer distance. NMC batteries balance energy density, life, and cost, and they're very, very popular in battery electric vehicles for passenger transportation. And the third battery to cover here is nickel metal hydride batteries, or NIMH. They have certainly been the mainstay of hybrid electric vehicles. For example, for those online that recall the Toyota Prius, and certainly they were in vogue before lithium-ion batteries really became the standard battery selection. Nickel metal hydride batteries offer good performance at low temperature, are less prone to overheating, but as you can see there, the energy density is quite low compared to the other two, so there's some challenges. But moving to the next slide, let's now try and focus on where manganese is sourced and really its role in battery chemistry. So looking at this graphic, we're trying to just basically show the top 7 manganese producers in 2023. And the size of the bubble represents the relative significance of each country. And you can see there's essentially 3 large bubbles and for manganese production, and that was in South Africa, Gabon, and Australia. Now, manganese is commonly known for its distinct properties. It's quite ductile, malleable, and can conduct electricity and heat. It's commonly processed as a ferroalloy to either produce ferromanganese or silicomanganese as an alloy addition to steel production. According to the US Bureau of Geological Services, around 85 to 90% of manganese ore currently produced is used in the production of these ferroalloys, which leaves relatively small quantities for battery chemistry, and hence the requirement to bring additional capacity online. This trend is likely to continue as there are relatively few projects in the pipeline to bridge the supply gap outside of Australia. But what I can say is there's been a number of examples recently of announcements of projects, and examples include the Firebird Metals Limited Oakover project. There's another one called the Element 25, and that's relevant to people on the periodic table. 25 is manganese. The Butcherbird project in Australia, which is also looking at downstream processing facilities in the USA. And there's also another one recently I saw, which is the Southern Hemisphere Mining Los Pumas in Chile. So it's encouraging this is taking place, but my suggestion is we need more. So why is manganese used in batteries? Really just to try and focus on why I'm talking about it. Manganese itself does provide thermal stability in the structure of NMC batteries, which aids in the performance of lithium-ion batteries. The images show a few forms of manganese. In my experience, manganese is often found typically either as an oxide, referred to as pyrolusite, or as a carbonate. But the battery manufacturers actually prefer MnSO4, and particularly the high purity product. And The reason for that is it undergoes additional refining to remove impurities, which may actually impact battery performance. So the MnSO4, or manganese sulfate to high purity, is the main manganese feedstock, and its refining capacity, as I alluded to, is almost entirely in China, and obviously that is potentially a problem getting access to that. Adding manganese to battery chemistry is done in a measured way, and on the next slide I actually try and demystify how batteries are labelled, etc. So typically battery chemistry is stated as a combination of letters and numbers. And if you look at the graphic and you can see the second battery on the left-hand side, you see NMC, which refers to obviously nickel, manganese, cobalt. And then you see three numbers there, 622. And really, I guess what that's about is the relative proportions. So if we use the rule that 9% represents 1 from a ratio perspective, nickel is quoted as 6 because it's 54% divided by 9, which is 6. We then follow the same logic for manganese and cobalt, which are 17 and 18%. Divide them by 9, it's essentially 2. So that's where the 622 comes from. What's interesting in this graphic and what I'm trying to show is you can see that the green highlighted area is manganese. The amount of manganese required is certainly looking to be increased in the future. Analysts are sort of indicating somewhere between 5 to 10 times the amount of manganese required in 2030 than compared today. So why am I calling manganese the forgotten mineral? During a recent failed takeover, so maybe for those online who may not be aware who some of these players are, so Anglo American and BHP are both very large mining conglomerates, I'll say, very, very large globally. But during a recent failed takeover of Anglo by BHP, in all the correspondence, in the presentations, in the press releases, videos, etc., there was never any mention about manganese. When asked about Anglo's manganese assets, the CEO of Anglo replied to the analyst, "You might actually be the first analyst to have asked us about manganese in the past 5 years." Now, as I've just taken you through, manganese has a crucial role to play in battery chemistry, and the fact that two of the largest companies weren't talking about it, I found extremely curious. But probably the other thing which is kind of interesting is Anglo's manganese assets are located in Groote Eylandt, which is the Australia on the right-hand side, that black dot on the right-hand side, and also in a place referred to as Hotazel. I've got a South African colleague who assures me that name actually is reflective of it. It's in the Cape area and it can get quite hot as hell. Anyway, of interest is that BHP formerly owned the Gemco operations and then spun them off as part of the South 32 demerger. South 32 and Anglo are actually now both sort of co-owners and operators and have significant influence on the supply of manganese to the market, and hence why I say it's curious that nobody's talking about it. So let's now move to the graphite story. I think we've spoken enough about manganese. So the global supply of graphite really is a totally different story. The global supply and production is dominated by China, as you'll see on the next slide. So at first glance, if we take the same sort of idea about the size of the bubble indicates where it is, you could be confused as thinking that China has all the supply of graphite. Well, that's not the case. They certainly are the world leader in graphite production, but what's interesting is that China, from a reserves perspective, only really holds 16% of global known reserve inside China. And you ask me, how is that? Well, they've certainly been very strategic and are sourcing graphite feedstock from other countries and typically Africa. And probably the example I know quite well is Mozambique, where they have high volumes of high purity graphite. They often provide investment, and they do that obviously to either get a controlling interest or take full ownership in foreign countries, and through that secure feedstock for their downstream refining. Other potential suppliers of graphite, as you can see in the graphic, include Russia and Ukraine, North and South Korea. But I think we're all aware that these are areas which are obviously going through some pretty tough times in terms of conflict, warfare, etc. So supply from these countries is certainly not assured. So I guess maybe moving to the next slide, what types of graphite are actually required for anodes? So this is probably a bit of a busy slide, and I do apologize. So the image on the left is trying to indicate you can see the graphite anode on the right hand side of the graphic through the electrolyte and then across to the cathode. But graphite itself occurs in many forms, and in terms of usage in batteries, there's a number of different types. There's the natural flake graphite, which is becoming less popular. There's the spheroidized graphite, which I'll talk to a bit more in a second, and obviously synthetic graphite, which is obviously artificially forming graphite from other feedstock. As Etienne alluded to, the battery anode material in a lithium-ion battery is graphite, and there's not really too many competitors to that. And often it is a balanced mix of the spherical graphite and synthetic graphite. Now, battery manufacturers use the spheroidization to basically improve the properties of the natural flake graphite, and they do this obviously by putting it in essentially a mill to round the edges. Spheroidizing is literally to try and smooth the rough edges, which increases its properties or improves its properties such as density, the surface area, and obviously the conductivity of the powder itself. So as a result, really spherical graphite anodes exhibit better electrochemical performance. And this is obviously reflected in things such as the number of cycles and the long-term stability when compared to natural graphite flake. As I mentioned, the reason we see the spheroidization taking place is to make it sort of rounder. If we look at the image on the top right-hand side there, you can see natural graphite flake in the image on the left. And then the time indicated here, I hope you can see GR15 and GR30, and that refers essentially to the time where it's actually in contact. So it refers to 15 minutes or 30 minutes inside the mill. Now, obviously, you don't want to leave the graphite in the mill for too long because it will literally just grind it to a very, very fine dust. I guess what's important is that natural graphite is lower cost and has superior footprints to the synthetic graphite anodes. The point I guess I want to make here is that synthetic graphite production typically is 4 times more carbon intensive than natural graphite production. And the reason for that is that it needs fossil fuels and significant amounts of energy to get up to the temperatures required to graphitize the coke. And when I say high temperatures, I'm referring sort of 1500 to 2000 degrees Celsius. So certainly takes a lot of energy. While graphite is the main constituent for the anode material, what we are starting to see is developments with the introduction of small percentages of high purity silicon. And if you look at the graph on the bottom right-hand, the bar graph on the bottom right-hand side, you can see there really, I guess, percentages of silicon is increasing. Silicon certainly by itself can hold more energy than graphite, up to 10 times more, it's reported. But the issue is, and Etienne alluded to it in his safety moment, about it can actually expand to more than 3 times its original volume. So it's actually impractical at this stage anyway to use silicon-only anodes. So hence the idea of blending it to get the best of both worlds. So I guess probably one of the questions to ask is, why is graphite actually used in EV batteries? Well, I've covered that, but probably how much graphite is actually used. And I think the answer may surprise you, because when we talk about batteries, a lot of people think about the lithium, the manganese, the cobalt, etc. These are the cathode materials that we've been talking about. But graphite, as you can see here, is actually the biggest proportion of mineral composition in a standard battery, up to 28%. What I'm showing here in the pie chart is obviously most of the constituents. You can see a couple of, I guess, little red herrings, which is the steel, and aluminium, which is the casing. But the focus, I'm guessing, is on comparing the graphite to nickel, to lithium and manganese, and it's up to basically 5 to 6 times those volumes. So, graphite is very much integral to batteries. And the reason for that is the battery charging speed is determined by the anode. And as I mentioned before, graphite really does allow quick and effective charging speeds. Really, I guess graphite certainly provides high capacity, allows, and through battery development is allowing higher driving ranges in electric vehicles. The continued development of the silicon graphite composites will hopefully increase battery capacity and driving range. I guess time will tell. But certainly, as you can see, graphite is a very large player and a significant component within the industry. Looking at in 2023, the bottom left-hand side, you can see there that the energy essentially estimated to be output from EV batteries was 750 gigawatt hours, and forecast based on the demand I was talking about before and uptake in electric vehicles is forecast to increase by 2030 to 4,500 gigawatt hours, which is obviously a substantial increase. Now, as I mentioned, in terms of graphite, it's substantial in terms of kilograms per battery, but based on the gigawatt hours, as I'm showing in the top right of the slide, 800 to 900 tons of graphite are required per gigawatt hour. So there's a substantial amount of graphite required moving forward. As I've talked about, China is a dominant producer of both flake and purified spheroidal graphite, and as a result has really strong influence on commodity prices for graphite. And just to reflect that, late last year, China introduced an export permit system on graphite, which really limited the availability of graphite to battery manufacturers across the rest of the world. So probably the question to ask then is, well, how are battery makers actually looking to plan to source their graphite in the future? And really the question is not clear. Really non-Chinese producers have a really high barrier to entry. Yeah, there are issues around graphite. It's often seen as sort of dirty and not ESG friendly. Typically long lead times to bring these types of projects to market, often related to environmental considerations. And of course, you need to secure environmental permits to bring any mine online. But if there's a potential that it will have a negative impact, you need to manage that, and that comes with a cost. But probably the key factor is that obviously China over the last 10, 15 plus years, they've been developing their specialist knowledge about how to operate these facilities. That's something that the Western world or non-China producers need to learn, and we need to catch up fast. What is encouraging is that we're starting to see significant activity in non-China graphite projects. And I've indicated a few on the screen here. You can see there's a couple in Canada, in Ontario. There's obviously an expansion to a refinery taking place in Sweden, and a number of graphite projects starting to sort of pop up and be announced in Australia. So certainly very encouraging. But certainly, as expected, China is not really looking to let go of their strong market position, which really brings me to the next section of my presentation, which is on geopolitics. I think as a quick sort of summary, the demand for critical minerals to power electric vehicles has really resulted in a dynamic interplay between China and the US, particularly, other countries too, but particularly those two. If we move to the next slide, what we can say is that we've seen an evolving landscape of trade policies, partnerships and sanctions all being established to try and make sure that they maintain position and secure critical minerals to meet global energy transition demands. This slide is really just trying to show sort of a chronology of events that have taken place. And if we look at the first two circles on the left-hand side, that's really showing over the last 10 years between 2010 and 2020, China really systematically invested in overseas and domestic mines that obviously feed into their own, the Chinese own refineries. So material being sourced obviously is going in there, and they've been very strategic and power to them. As I mentioned, they introduced an export permit system to really just make sure they controlled what was going on. And that's obviously had a bit of a ripple effect in the US and other countries that produce batteries, for example, Japan and South Korea. Some of you online may be aware the Biden government also introduced some incentive, and it was called the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. When this was passed, and that was passed in 2022, August 2022, it was regarded as one of the most significant pieces of climate and energy legislation in US history. And why was it introduced? Largely, it was to try and get domestic manufacturing and get investment in domestic manufacturing in the US by providing financial incentives for the production of critical minerals. And some would say it was successful, but others would say opposite. Recently, moving on, I guess, back to China again, what we have seen, and there's a number of lithium players, non-Chinese, that have been impacted by this. They've been accused of flooding the lithium global market with lithium and obviously causing a price drop as they really, I guess, potentially try and eliminate competing projects. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, China accounts for about 2/3 of the world's lithium chemical output, which is mainly used in battery technologies. Prices of lithium have fallen by at least, if not more than 80% in the past year due to this overproduction. So we're seeing a lot of dynamics sort of taking place here. And I guess, as I mentioned, several large downstream manufacturing facilities have announced plans to either pause, halt, or reduce production whilst these prices are at a very low level. I guess in summary on this slide, I am certainly no expert in foreign trade policy or politics, but certainly as an impartial observer, it will be fascinating to see what actions will be taken by the recently elected 47th president of the US to ensure critical minerals from China and other global producers is maintained. So it'll be fascinating to keep an eye on that. In conclusion, we certainly covered a number of issues related to critical minerals, and I've tried to put a spotlight on manganese and graphite. I think fair to say there's still much to be done in the EV and battery chemistry space. There are significant opportunities to really, I guess, make a difference to the supply chain dynamic. Technologies that are needed to meet the challenges for tomorrow don't exist today. There's a lot of developmental work, new ideas, constantly evolving going on that we need to take into account. One thing to say is that rapid change is normal in the EV space. Battery chemicals and how it comes together, and going back to that ratio of chemicals being added to batteries constantly is evolving at very rapid speed. I guess the message is that collaboration is an imperative. And the reason I say that is there are multiple stages in the critical mineral supply chain, and really no one company or one entity can do it all. Obviously, the Chinese have demonstrated they can, but they're through their organisation. But in the Western world, I believe it's more about collaboration. And what I'm really alluding to here is engagement with technology providers, with obviously clients, funding agencies, wherever they may be, governments, and obviously others, is really an imperative to ensure success. I was fortunate to attend a critical minerals conference in August of this year. And at that conference, the US Export-Import Bank, or EXIM as they're known, stated that they're committed to working with partners to bolster critical minerals supply chain at a crucial time for shared economic security. So what's clear here is that the various sectors are realizing they need to put skin in the game, invest to try and bring these projects forward. I think it's fair to say the United States government is working very closely with its partners to create diverse and sustainable critical mineral supply chains outside of China. And I believe as a US-based company, Fluor is very well positioned to make a difference in this changing landscape. And the reason I say that is that to meet this challenge, in January 2023, Fluor advised the market that it had established a team of industry professionals focused on the critical minerals business. And what I mean by that is, obviously, we see that there's a requirement, a need, and we have the resources and obviously the desire to get involved and assist our clients with this challenge. But what I'm not saying is that we're trying to do this at the exclusion of something else. This market will be pursued in parallel to our traditional bulk commodity projects. And in the mining space, I would refer to things such as, for example, iron ore, copper, potash, etc. In conclusion, I guess to state, as a US company operating in multiple jurisdictions across the globe, I think Fluor, we are ready to support our clients in delivering their critical minerals projects to market. I really hope that this presentation was able to increase your understanding of some of the key aspects of critical minerals, and I guess I now open it to the floor to see if we have any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Etienne. As you mentioned, Andrew, let's take some moments now to address questions we've received from the audience. The first question reads as follows. To what extent do synthetic products such as graphite and other replacement minerals offer an alternative to traditionally mined minerals?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think there is obviously the ability to make graphite. I mean, graphite, it's relatively abundant across the globe. I mean, there are local areas where it's obviously in greater reserve. But making synthetic graphite, I guess, as we move towards trying to reduce carbon footprints, reducing carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, etc., really the challenge with synthetic graphite, for example, is it really is very intensive and adds significantly to ESG issues. So I think, yes, the person who asked the question is spot on. It's a viable alternative. We're seeing that China are certainly engaging a lot with synthetic graphite, for example. But I guess as we move towards trying to reduce our emissions and try and meet the requirements of greenhouse gas, etc., I'm not sure it's necessarily the way forward in by itself. I think we really need to be looking at doing things in a more sustainable, environmentally friendly way.
Thank you very much. Our next question: how are batteries typically recycled, and do we recover large portions of metal from the recycling process?
Yeah, so battery recycling, as I mentioned, it's still fairly immature, but I guess in high level terms, battery recycling starts with essentially a destruction of the battery itself. So you're looking to break open the shell. I mean, there's a fair amount of components, as we've talked about, inside a battery, so you need to get access to them. So normally it's a mechanical destruction of the battery itself. What's then formed essentially is what they refer to as black mass. And then it's a selective chemical extraction process to try and, I guess, recover some of these valued critical minerals. Now, in terms of efficiencies, Hardane, I think you mentioned, people such as Redwood Materials, who I mentioned earlier, they're claiming up to 85 to 90% recovery of some of these critical minerals. So clearly that's significant. I think probably the best industry I've seen for recycling is aluminium or aluminum in terms of its ability to be recycled. And I think with some of the numbers that we're seeing from the recycling of batteries to date, there's still some work to be done, but it's certainly very encouraging.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question: how is Fluor structured to address the need for growth in the critical minerals industry?
Okay, that's a great question too. Well, I mentioned before that obviously we're in multiple jurisdictions. We have 2 centers of excellence for critical minerals. One's in Granville, South Carolina in the US. And obviously we have an office here in Perth where I'm located. So that's the first thing. And these centers of excellence really contain people with industry recognized, well-experienced people with capabilities in these types of industries. I guess what I've through my preparation of this presentation, what I realized, I mean, Fluor is a massive company, and within Fluor, as we start to sort of probe and see what else is out there, I've discovered it's not just in the mining of critical minerals we have capability. So that's what I'm alluding to with Greenville and Perth. We also have significant capability in battery full chain. And this can include obviously the battery manufacturing process, the anodes, the electrolytes, etc. So we're covered across all. I think for us, we're involved in engineering, procurement, construction. We are in innovation, and certainly looking to work with our clients as they develop new technologies. So I think we are very well positioned to assist in that space.
Wonderful. Now, it looks like that is all the time we have for the questions today. Thank you again, Andrew and Etienne, for this informative webinar and for the time that you have spent both today and in preparation. Thank you also to our audience for attending. It has been a pleasure of mine being your moderator today. Please continue to stay informed of these events by visiting the Innovation Builders page on fluor.com or by following our social media channels using #InnovationBuilders. If you would like us to send you email notifications of future webinars, please email us at innovations.builders@fluor.com with opt-in in the subject line. We appreciate your attention and thank you again for dialing in. We will send out a compiled list of the Q&A shortly, along with the notification that the webinar recording is available for replay on fluor.com. If you have any questions or require additional information, please email innovation.builders@fluor.com and someone from our team will get back to you. From all of us on the Innovation Builders team, have a safe day.